evening, everyone. Thank you for traveling through the snow to make it here tonight. And I'd like to start off by presenting a question. Have any of you, maybe by a show of hands, ever had an intuition that somebody was staring at you and you turn around and make eye contact with that person? Yeah, it's pretty common. Have any of you had a time in your life where you knew exactly what you were supposed to do, even though you didn't know maybe why you were supposed to do that thing? Is that deep level of clarity? Yeah, as have I. Over the course of several years, I started having visions about traveling through Central America. The visions, there were 4 of them. They were fairly clear. The first vision was that I should start in Mexico and travel south. The second vision was that something big would happen in Guatemala. In the third vision, I kept seeing my death in Panama. And in the fourth vision, I was clear that I would come home early from the trip for my father's funeral, even though he wasn't sick at the time. A little bit bigger than just noticing somebody staring at you at the grocery store. It's very true. And at the same time, I believe that we all have these intuitions. We all have these times where we know something that we shouldn't necessarily have access to. And I mean, it's so ingrained in our bodies, it's built into our language. I know when I was growing up, Mom had eyes in the back of her head. And she wasn't the only one in the neighborhood. I got in trouble by many of those mothers. We've all heard about the businessman or businesswoman who trusts their gut instinct despite all the data and has that really great deal go through. We've all had those times where the answer from one of our friends is, "What does your heart tell you?" Or even where we're walking down that street that we walked down so many different times before, and on this one specific evening, the hair stands up on the back of your neck, and you know that there's something you need to be paying attention to. It's built into our language. It's built into our DNA. And so one of the wonderful things for me is that there's starting to be more research that's coming into the world around this. There's a person, Kelly Turner, PhD, who does research around integrative oncology. And in her book, Radical Remissions, which the subtitle really defines it very, very clearly, it's looking at cancer patients who survived despite all the odds. And when she looked at those type of people, she found, I believe there were actually about 75 things that those people had in common, but in the top 9 that actually made it into her book was not only trusting, but listening to and following through with your intuition. Okay? And in that specific chapter within her book, she shares some research where there was a study done where a person had an option between 2 different curtains on a computer screen, picking 1 or 2, and trying to decide which one had a specific image behind it. And a lot of times our body knows before our mind knows, so I'll talk about body wisdom later this evening. And what they would do to test this was they would look for subtle physiological responses like the hands sweating. And in this study, what they found was a person's body would start sweating 2 to 3 seconds before the computer even knew which image was going to be behind the curtain. So we're starting to get research about something that I believe humans have known for thousands of years and that we're re-remembering and re-stepping back into. So my goal for this evening is very transparent. My goal is that by having this conversation, maybe this is a part of your life that you'll start re-remembering and maybe reintegrate back into your life. To let those little whispers, those little hints about life support what you're doing on the day-to-day. It might just be something at the grocery store, it might be protecting you from an auto accident, or it might be helping you with a piece of information that will support a loved one. Okay? So that's the idea I'm wanting to reintroduce into this conversation. And so I think it's important for me to share not only how these things started with me, but also maybe some tools and ideas that might help support in your own development. So for me, I guess right before my intuition started, there was just a series of events that had begun to happen. I had been in a couple small auto accidents. I was at a point in my small business at that year mark where I wasn't sure if I was going to make it over the hump with finances and new patients and revenue coming in. I had got out of a 4-year relationship, and so I lost the girl, I lost the house, I lost my dog, and I grew up in Wyoming. And anytime you lose a girl, a dog, and a house, it's either a really good or a really bad country song, just depending on your point of view about that type of music. So all those things had happened, and then life became different. I started meeting new, very interesting people that I'd never met before. I started waking up from these dreams where it wasn't just a normal dream. I would wake up and go, wow, there was some information, there was some wisdom in that dream that I should pay attention to. I started hearing words that I had never heard before, and in hearing those words, I would go to Barnes & Noble, and thank you, Barnes & Noble, you were a real blessing at the time. I'd go hang out for like 6-8 hours. I would read a half dozen books, I'd buy a half dozen books. I was spending a half day or a full day on Google, on YouTube. I was studying quantum physics and all these esoteric things, and I was ravenous for information because my life had dramatically changed and I wanted to know what was happening. I wanted to understand it. And so, as this was happening, another great thing that would start happening is somebody would be like, oh my gosh, you need to read book A. And the second person would come in and they'd be like, I have this book you absolutely have to read. It's called book A. And when the third person would show up and would say, man, I've got this book that I can't wait to gift to you, I would say, is it called book A? And they would go, how did you do that? And it was nothing special I was doing. I was just paying attention. I was paying attention to what my body was telling me. I was paying attention to that little voice that whispers inside our mind. And I was paying attention to the world around me. And I think this is a really great time for all of us to get onto the same level here, because this is an interesting conversation to have. So I want to come into a point where I'm going to say that all of us hear voices. All of us hear voices. And for some of you that don't believe me, the voice inside your head right now is saying, that's not true. And some of you might have a different voice that's saying, is that true? And some of you have a voice that's saying, yeah, that's totally true. So all of us have voices inside our heads, and my belief is that most of those voices just aren't very kind. A lot of the meditation and mindfulness movement, I believe, is really around, and they've labeled it really well with the monkey mind. It's about getting rid of those voices inside of our head because they're typically not positive or productive. They're not helping us. And in my case, at this time, luckily, the voice was very positive, and it was giving me information that was helping guide my life. And I started cultivating and deepening in that conversation because it really was a conversation. We know we've had arguments about, I'm going to buy this, I shouldn't buy that, I better buy that. If I don't buy that, she's going to say this. So it becomes a conversation, and in the conversation, I didn't know where the conversation was coming from. I was studying things such as, Carl Jung's idea of, mass consciousness or group consciousness. I didn't know if it was coming from my unconscious mind. I was studying quantum physics. I was studying ideas around, is this coming from the universe with the capital U, or spirit, or God? I didn't know where this voice was coming from, but the relationship was going much deeper, and I needed a way to communicate. And it started developing in a very playful way where I'd be like, dude, what the hell's going on right now? Dude, what am I supposed to do about that? Oh, dude, you told me about that and I didn't listen. I will next time. So that's where dude showed up in my life. And the idea of learning the language of dude, not all communication is language. Certainly it's words, and I was hearing some words in my head, but it's also symbology, it's also visions, it's also body wisdom. I was getting those gut instincts. I was having feelings in my heart. I was having hair stand up on the back of my neck. And I was also noticing a lot of things in the world around me. So my goal in learning the language of dude was to continue cultivating this thing, which had become a very big factor in my life and was really helping in every aspect of my life. And it's one thing to test out your conversation with dude around the house, whether or not I need a hammer in a construction project I'm doing on the other side of the house or not. It was definitely helping there. For me, I had these 4 visions around Central America, and I didn't know specifically where they came from, but I trusted that those were something that I needed to follow through with. And we'll come back to that. Like I said, in a very transparent way, my goal for this evening is helping empower all of you to maybe cultivate and hear that little voice and have it support you as well. So I'm going to share some of the practices that worked for me. And what I would say about a talk around developing your intuition, intuitively, if what I'm telling you doesn't resonate, it's not for you. And maybe intuitively, you'll be like, oh, you know what, instead of doing that, I'm going to do this other thing. So I would say follow your intuition around that. One of the first things that, and I've already mentioned that started happening, was I would wake up from these dreams that weren't just normal dreams. There was a lot of information there. So I would start journaling about those. I would start going, is there something there for me to pay attention to? So I think dream work is a really great way to dive into that. The second was making sure the morning was mine. There's a friend of mine shares the idea that the first meeting of every day should be with yourself. So many of us, we know when you look at productivity and a lot of the research out there, if the first thing you grab is your cell phone and your email or text messages or starting off your day, from a business standpoint, your productivity goes down. From a personal growth standpoint, your ability to connect on the inside, in my mind, also goes down. So starting off the morning in a silent, kind of focused way, and it doesn't have to mean meditation, it doesn't have to mean anything special other than maybe it's a cup of your favorite warm drink, maybe it's a quiet time, maybe it's a book you enjoy reading. Start the day in the way that you want to experience it. Another thing that worked really well for me was walks in nature. So that's more of quiet time with the world around me. And just allowing that information to come in. I'm not walking a dog, I'm not out with a friend, I don't have any earbuds in, I'm just simply being. Now, at certain points in my life, I wasn't living close to nature, and so I've also done these walks through warehouse districts in Seattle. It really works anywhere, and it's about, with those couple pieces, are you quiet on the inside or are you quiet on the outside, so you can get a sense of what's coming into you, information-wise. A third piece that played a big part was actually just practicing. I mentioned the hammer doing construction on the house. I would be grabbing tools to do a construction project on the other side of the house, and I would hear that voice, grab the hammer, and I would get in an argument. I don't need the hammer. I'm doing this other project. We don't need hammers for this project. I'd be on the other side of the house a few minutes later, and sure enough, I'd need a hammer. Okay, you told me. So I started practicing. Maybe I got the hint that I should have the umbrella today, but it's sunny out, so I'm not going to take it, and it starts raining later. Oh, okay. I had an idea about that. So it's just a practice of starting to listen to see if you're getting some hints and some ideas about different things that happen in your life. After the part of practicing, when it starts happening, one thing I've noticed is that if a spouse or a child or a friend ever does something for you that you really appreciate, if you acknowledge them for it, if you show gratitude, it's more likely it's going to happen a second time. And so I started having a lot of gratitude for these small little hints in life that were coming in. So I was practicing it, I was having gratitude, and the last piece that I think is really key is taking action. I feel like, anytime we receive good information, if it was an intuition, if it was a piece of wisdom from a friend or loved one, even if it's something you thought of cognitively, if you don't take action on it, if it doesn't get grounded out in this reality, it's just a daydream. It doesn't matter. So take action. And I really feel like an epiphany without action is, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of other words I could, finish that off with, but I think unfortunate, is enough. So as this starts developing in my life, and I really hope that it does for all of you, I hope these tools will help that you can kind of develop it, cultivate it, and start to follow it. And I think a big thing with talking about a subject like this, Brené Brown does a good job of teaching us about vulnerability. There's something vulnerable about starting to listen to the voice in your head, to start maybe trusting in it, to start taking action. Cultivating courage to do that. Luckily, it's an internal game. You don't have to tell anybody about it. Just start having a little experiment with yourself. That conversation's happening anyway. Let it be positive. So, when it comes to action, I did take action. I did travel down to Mexico and go south from there. Something big did happen in Guatemala. And I remember the day that I received the email from my family that my dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So I did come home early from that trip. And I flew from Guatemala City back into Denver, Colorado, late one evening. And the next morning I woke up and I made the rest of the drive into a small town in southern Wyoming where I grew up. There's an interesting thing about intuitions. All I've ever asked for is for them to be honest, those intuitions. And in driving home, even that last 100 miles, I was crying. And, there's a saying, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And in that instance, all I wanted to do was make it home before my dad passed. And I can say, thankfully, that I was. was able to make it home. I got to spend a month with him and my mom and sister. And it's the most healing time of all of our lives. There was so much family healing that happened. There was so much connection that happened, so much joy and laughter and tears, and a really deepening bond between the four of us. And I'm so grateful for that last month that I got to spend with my dad. When he passed, all three of us were there. And yeah, it's an interesting thing to have one of the most difficult things in your life and one of the most amazing happen at the same time. And I think that with an event, with any big event, whether it's like the pinnacle event of a lifetime or if it's the most difficult thing you could ever imagine, after any event, tomorrow happens. And you get to keep moving forward. You really have no choice. And the next day, I woke up and I didn't exactly know what was supposed to happen next. But one piece that I did know was that I trusted in my ability to listen to the language of dude. And life kept happening. I moved, I opened a new business, new relationships continue to develop. And I still, obviously, intuition's a big part of my life. It still is. I still hope for those little intuitions that guide me. I still miss little things that I wish I would have caught. And at this time, I have two big visions that are still guiding me. The first is, I need to share the story of my first trip to Central America before I go back and do a second trip to Central America. And the next vision is that I'll fly back to Guatemala. I'll continue traveling south to meet my destiny in Panama. And as I step through Panama into South America, I know that I'll be the man I need to be to do what I'm here to do. Again, I really hope that this has maybe sparked a remembering in all of you. I hope that I've given you some really powerful tools to start developing your own intuition. I hope maybe I've given you that kind of internal permission to maybe intuitively come up with your own tools around developing your intuition. And from the bottom of my heart, this is a message I haven't had a platform for. It's the thing that I'm most grateful for in my life. And I'm so grateful for all of you that made it out this evening. Thank you.